The glass god gravity is the only judge you cannot bribe. It is the only law in the universe that does not care about your net worth, your reputation, or your followers. You can lie to your investors about the stability of your company. You can lie to the media about the strength of your character. You can even lie to yourself when you look in the mirror at night. But you cannot lie to gravity. It waits. It is patient. It tests every weakness, every crack, every corner you cut in the dark. And eventually, it pulls down everything that was not built on truth. Most people today are building their lives on smoke. We chase the quick win, the viral moment, the fast cash. We want the view from the summit without the agony of the climb. We build skyscrapers out of ego and glass, convincing ourselves they will stand forever. But what happens when the ground shakes? What happens when the storm comes and the facade is stripped away? This is the story of Elias Thorne. To understand the scale of his collapse, you must first understand the height of his arrogance. Elias was not just an architect. He was a deity of the modern skyline. At 32 years old, he was the youngest partner in the history of the prestigious firm Sterling and Finch. He didn't build buildings, he built statements. His designs were aggressive, sharp, defying the laws of physics. He despised concrete. He hated stone. He worshipped glass and light. "Stone is for graves," he would tell his interns. "We build for the sky." He lived a life of zero friction. He drove a Porsche 911 Turbo through the streets of Manhattan at 3 a.m., convincing himself he was untouchable. He drank whiskey that cost more than a steelworker's annual salary. He was surrounded by people who only knew how to say yes. He had forgotten what resistance felt like. He had forgotten that the world is heavy. The beginning of the end had a name, the Vertex. It was to be his masterpiece, a 50-story luxury residential tower in Chicago. The design was impossible, a twisting needle of glass that seemed to float above the streets. It was bold, it was dangerous, and it was vastly over budget. 3 months before the grand opening, the price of high-grade structural steel skyrocketed due to trade tariffs. The budget began to bleed. The developers, men with soft hands and hard eyes, called Elias into a boardroom that smelled of leather and fear. They told him the numbers didn't work. They told him the profit margin was evaporating. They suggested a solution. Switch the load-bearing supports in the main atrium from grade A ballistic steel to a cheaper, experimental grade B alloy. The simulation showed it was technically sufficient, though the safety margin was razor-thin. Elias looked at the spreadsheets. He looked at the engineers, who sat in silence, too afraid to object. He didn't see the risk. He saw his completion bonus. He saw his face on the cover of Architectural Digest. He saw his legacy. He picked up the pen and signed the order. "Do it," he said. "Physics is just a suggestion. It will hold." The Vertex opened in November. It was hailed as a triumph of modern engineering. The critics called it weightless. Elias stood in the center of the massive glass atrium, drinking champagne, basking in the applause, believing he had conquered nature itself. But nature always bats last. February brought a historic blizzard to Chicago. It was a storm that the locals would talk about for decades. The temperature plummeted to 20 degrees below zero. The winds clocked at 70 miles per hour, howling through the grid of the city like a wounded animal. The metal in the atrium began to contract in the freezing cold. The wind load pushed against the glass curtain wall with the force of a freight train. It happened at 2:15 in the morning. The lobby was mostly empty, save for the night security guard, a man named Arthur, and a cleaning crew working in the back offices. The grade B alloy, brittle from the cold and stressed beyond its limit, didn't bend. It snapped. The sound was louder than a gunshot. It was the scream of failing metal. The primary truss gave way, and the entire glass roof of the atrium, tons of steel and reinforced glass, imploded. It crashed down into the lobby with the force of a bomb. The shockwave blew out the front doors. Nobody died. That was the only miracle of the night. But the destruction was absolute. The Jewel of Chicago was nothing more than a twisted ruin of snow and jagged metal. The fallout was instant and brutal. The investigation took less than 2 weeks. The emails were found. The signature on the change order was Elias's. He wasn't just fired, he was erased. The lawsuits hit him like a swarm of locusts. Negligence, malpractice, reckless endangerment. The developers, desperate to save their own skins, threw him to the wolves. They painted him as a rogue artist who ignored safety for aesthetics. His license was stripped. His assets were frozen. The Porsche, the loft in Tribeca, the watch collection, the investments, everything was seized to pay for the damages. But the worst part wasn't the poverty. It was the shame. Elias Thorne became a pariah. He couldn't walk down the street without feeling the eyes of judgment. He was the man who almost killed innocent people to save a few dollars. He sat in his empty apartment, the electricity cut off, eating cold food out of a can. He stared at the city skyline he used to rule. He realized, for the first time, that he hadn't built anything real. He had built a monument to his own greed, and it had crumbled at the first sign of a storm. He knew he couldn't stay. He had to run. He had to go somewhere where the name Elias Thorne meant nothing. Elias fled to the end of the world. He didn't go to Europe or the tropics. He needed punishment. He needed a place where the cold was real enough to numb the noise in his head. He ended up in Deadhorse, Alaska. It is a place of industrial machinery, permafrost, and men who are running from their pasts. There is no architecture there, only survival. He had no money. He had no credentials. The only job he could find was as a general laborer on a pipeline maintenance crew. Imagine the humiliation. The man who used to design billion-dollar towers with a platinum stylus was now begging for a job holding a shovel. The foreman was a giant of a man named Big Jim Kowalski. Jim was 60 years old, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, and looked like he was carved out of granite. He looked at Elias, at his soft, manicured hands, his expensive haircut that was growing out, his posture of defeated arrogance. "You're a city boy," Jim grunted, spitting tobacco into the snow. "You won't last a week. The cold up here doesn't care about your feelings." "I need the money," Elias whispered, staring at his boots. $15 an hour, Jim said. "You carry the heavy stuff. You don't talk. You don't complain. If you slow us down, I leave you on the side of the road." The first month was a descent into hell. Elias wasn't drawing lines on a screen anymore. He was hauling 80-pound bags of cement mix through knee-deep snow. He was carrying steel rebar that froze to his gloves. His body went into shock. His muscles tore. His back spasmed. He vomited behind the truck twice before lunch on his first day. The other men mocked him. They called him Pretty Boy. They bet money on when he would quit. Every night, Elias lay on a thin cot in a shared trailer that smelled of diesel and sweat. His hands were blistered and bloody. He couldn't even make a fist to hold his toothbrush. He cried silent, shaken sobs. He wanted to die. He thought about walking out into the tundra and letting the cold take him. He thought about calling his old friends, begging for a loan. But he knew nobody would answer. He stayed. Not because he was brave, but because he had nowhere else to go. Week 1 turned into month 1. Month 1 turned into year 1. A transformation began to take place. The blisters on his hands broke, bled, healed, and turned into calluses thick as leather. The soft fat on his body burned away, replaced by corded muscle. But the real change was in his mind. Smashing rocks and hauling steel teaches you something that glass never can. It teaches you density. It teaches you that the world fights back. Elias began to respect the materials. He saw how the welders inspected every inch of a seam. If they missed a millimeter, the pipeline would burst and the environment would be destroyed. He saw how the crane operators felt the wind before they moved a load. He saw that here, in the real world, cutting corners didn't mean a bigger bonus. It meant death. One day, deep in the winter, they were repairing a bridge support over a frozen river. It was minus 30 degrees. Elias was mixing concrete, shivering. Big Jim was watching him. "You're lifting with your back," Jim said. It was the first time he had spoken to Elias without shouting. Jim walked over and kicked Elias's boot, adjusting his stance. "Use your legs. The ground is strong. You are weak. Use the ground." "Use the ground," Elias repeated. It was a simple instruction, but it hit him like a lightning bolt. For 10 years, he had tried to defy the ground. He had tried to float above it. He realized he knew nothing about building. He knew about decorating. But these men knew about structure. The test came 3 months later. A massive blizzard, a whiteout, hit the region. Visibility was 0. The crew was at the local bar when the sheriff's radio crackled. The roof of the town's community center was groaning under the weight of the snow. The main beams were cracking. There were 50 people sheltering inside, families, children. The fire department couldn't reach them through the drifts. Big Jim looked at his crew. "Grab the excavators." They rushed to the site. The wind was howling like a banshee. Inside the center, people were terrified. The main wooden beam was sagging visibly. Wood was splintering with loud cracks. "We need to prop it up," Jim shouted. "Get the jacks." "It won't work," Elias yelled over the wind. "The floor can't take the point load. If you push up with jacks, you'll punch through the floorboards, and the roof will come down anyway." Jim stopped. He looked at Elias. "What do we do? You're the architect, aren't you?" It was the first time anyone had acknowledged his past. Elias looked at the sagging beam. He looked at the terrified families. He closed his eyes. He didn't see the art. He saw the vectors. He saw the load paths. He saw the gravity. "We don't push up," Elias said, his voice commanding. "We pull. We create a tension ring." He grabbed a roll of heavy steel cable. "Drill through the side walls. Run the cable under the beam. Anchor it to the excavators outside. We create a suspension hammock. We catch the roof." It was ugly. It was crude. But it was pure physics. For 3 hours, they fought the storm. Elias was everywhere, drilling, tying knots, directing the heavy machinery. He wasn't afraid. He was in a state of flow. They tightened the cables. The excavators pulled. The sagging beam groaned, and then stopped. The cables took the weight. The roof held. When morning came, 50 people walked out alive. Elias sat in the snow, exhausted, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. Big Jim walked over and handed him a cup of black coffee. "You're a damn good builder, Eli," Jim said. Elias smiled. It was the first time in years he felt proud, not of a drawing, but of a reality. Part 3. The Mountain and the Master. News of the rescue traveled quietly. It didn't make national news, but it reached the right people. An old contact, a structural engineer named Sarah, who had always believed in his talent, tracked him down. She sent him an email with a single attachment: blueprints for the Void Bridge. It was a suicide project, a remote crossing in the Andes Mountains of Peru, designed to connect a mining town to the rest of the world. The terrain was a nightmare. High altitude, constant seismic activity, extreme winds. 3 other major firms had failed. One bridge had already collapsed during construction. The investors were desperate. Elias flew to New York to meet them. He walked into the glass skyscraper. He didn't wear a suit. He wore clean jeans, heavy work boots, and a black t-shirt. He didn't look like a boy wonder anymore. He looked like a man who could strangle a bear. He took up space in the room. "The budget is tight," the investor said, eyeing him skeptically. "We need it done in 18 months, and it needs to be earthquake-proof." Elias looked at the plans the other firms had drawn. They were high-tech suspension bridges, delicate and fancy. He pushed them off the table. "You're trying to fight the mountain," Elias said, his voice deep and calm. "You will lose. The mountain moves. The bridge must move with it." He took a napkin and drew a simple schematic. "We don't build rigid, we build flexible. Reinforced concrete segments linked by flexible steel tendons, like a spine. When the earthquake hits, the bridge dances. It doesn't break." "That's unconventional," the lead investor said. "It's never been done on this scale." "I know," Elias said. "That's why you called me. I'm not here to win an award. I'm here to build something that stands." He got the contract. He moved to the Andes. He didn't run the project from an office. He lived in a tent with the workers. He ate what they ate. He worked the line. He faced landslides, corruption from local suppliers, and outbreaks of sickness in the camp. There were days he wanted to quit. The old Elias would have cut corners. But every time he faced a decision, he remembered the sound of the glass crashing in Chicago. He chose the hard way. He spent $1 million of his own fee to import higher-grade cement. He personally inspected every single weld. 18 months later, a 7.2 magnitude earthquake hit the region. The ground rolled like the ocean. The investors in New York panicked. They called Elias's satellite phone. "Is it down? Did we lose it?" Elias was standing on the bridge, smoking a cigarette, feeling the aftershocks rumble beneath his boots. The bridge swayed gently, absorbing the massive energy, and then settled back into place. Not a single crack. "It's still here," Elias said into the phone. "It's not going anywhere." That bridge changed everything. Elias Thorne didn't go back to the world of luxury. He realized he didn't care about the egos of billionaires. He started a new firm, Iron and Earth. His philosophy was radical reality. No fake renders. No cost-cutting. He specialized in the impossible. Seawalls for rising oceans. Hurricane-proof schools for the Caribbean. Earthquake-safe hospitals for disaster zones. He became the most expensive architect in the world. Not because he was trendy, but because he was guaranteed. If you wanted a monument to your vanity, you hired someone else. If you wanted something that would survive the apocalypse, you hired Elias Thorne. 5 years later, the same developers who had fired him in Chicago came back. They wanted to build the tallest tower in Manhattan, a needle of glass. They offered him a design fee of $20 million. Elias walked into their boardroom. He looked at the model of the fragile glass tower. He reached out and pushed it with one finger. It wobbled. "I don't build toys anymore," Elias said. "We are offering you a kingdom," the CEO said, shocked. "You are offering me a cage," Elias replied. "You want to build monuments to yourselves. I want to build things that survive the storm." He walked out. He left $20 million on the table without looking back. Elias Thorne stands today on top of a massive seawall he built in the Pacific. The waves crash against it, 50-foot waves that would have crushed his old life. The wall doesn't move. He smiles, not the arrogant smirk of the boy he was, but the quiet smile of a man who has been to hell and built a castle there. Listen to me. Maybe your tower has collapsed. Maybe you built a business, a relationship, or a life on a foundation of ego, and it crumbled. Maybe you are standing in the wreckage right now, looking at the shards of glass, feeling the cold wind. Good. You are lucky. Because the facade is gone. The lie is over. Now you have a chance to build something real. Do not run from the quarry. Do not run from the low place. That is where the material is. That is where the truth is found. It will hurt. It will bleed. People will mock you. Let them. Let them play with their glass houses while you mix the concrete. Let them chase the trends while you lay the foundation. Because when the storm comes, and it is coming, their monuments will fall. But you will be standing on the rock. You will be the shelter. You will be the one who remains. The screen is black. The blueprints are gone. Pick up the hammer and build.